Welcome, everybody, to the May SJAA Imaging SIG meeting. And today we have Jared Wilson, who's going to talk to us about hosting our telescopes remotely. Jared, take it away.
Thanks very much. Hi, let me share my screen real fast, and then we will get started. All right, so hopefully everyone can now see my presentation. Let me put it in presentation mode there. So my name is Jared Wilson. I'm a member of the East Bay Astronomical Society, have been since around 2007 or so. I'm also a volunteer at Chabot Space and Science Center, so you can see me out there on Friday and Saturday nights on the observing deck doing outreach events, helping to run their telescopes. Usually doing EAA, electronically assisted astronomy, to demonstrate astrophotography to visitors at Chabot. And Hai asked me to speak tonight, and I chose the topic of remote imaging. I thought it would be good after the last presentation you got, which showed all the wonderful things you can accomplish with remote telescopes. I thought it might have gotten you all thinking about, well, what would take my imaging to the next level? And so I thought I'd show you, tell you a little bit about my experiences, what to expect, what to prepare for, etc. And this image on the front, on the first page here, just as it happens, this is my telescope in back here, the one that looks like it's covered in aluminum foil. And mine is hosted at Deep Sky West in Rao, New Mexico. So in terms of an agenda for this evening, first I was going to talk a little bit about why you might want to host your telescope and do your imaging remotely. Then move into just how much of a difference can you expect? What will improve as a result of hosting your telescope away from home? Then cover the costs a little bit, and this is intended to be the monetary costs, right? Just what are you going to spend? What are the monthly costs, the hidden costs, etc. Then a little bit on how do you pick a hosting site? It used to be there were only a couple to choose from. Now there are more than a dozen in the US and several in South America and a few in Europe. So lots of choices out there. And then go through how do you get ready if you decide you do want to try hosting your telescope. And then sort of what are the things are you what do you lose if you host? You know, does the magic go away or can you keep it fun? Is it really the same hobby or how does it change? And then finally finish up with who's it for? Is it a good match for you? So I'll start with the why would you want to host your telescope in the first place? Well, for my own astrophotography, I do deep sky astrophotography, not planetary. And I like pretty much all aspects of astrophotography. I want to be involved in the target selection. I want to be involved in the artistic vision for the image, right? Am I trying to go super deep or get as high resolution an image as I want? Am I going to want tight framing, wide field, etc.? Everything related to equipment setup, I enjoy. All the little tweaks to try and get my data quality as high as I can. And, you know, is the collimation right? Is my guiding as good as I can get it, etc. And then the computer side of it also is a lot of fun for me. It isn't for everyone, but it is for me. Most of my professional background is in IT, so I love the processing. And then finally, unlike a lot of you, I suspect, I print most of my images and even mat and frame them. And every now and then, my wife will even let me put one up. That's rare now, but every now and then I get to actually hang one. So I like to produce an actual physical result from all of my photography and all of my astrophotography. And hosting helps with the three that are in bold here, right? The equipment setup, the total exposure time that you might want to capture on your target, and the data quality. So it helps with setup mainly in that you don't need to set up each night. It's already set up. It's protected under a roof. Um, it's not just under a tarp. It's not something you have to, you know, pull out from the garage. Everything is good to go every night automatically. And then in terms of total exposure time, you know, if I decide to show what I really want in a particular subject, I need 30, 40, 50, 60 hours on target. That's easy to arrange with a hosted telescope. That's a lot harder to arrange if I'm going to have to drive to dark skies. And then finally, data quality, right? You get good signal to noise ratio in all of your images because people don't bother to put hosting sites under Portal 9 skies, right? They're all somewhere dark, and often even at altitude. So it was really to address those three aspects of the data quality on the lower left there, the setup, the total time, and the data quality. That's why I chose to host my telescope. So what do you get out of it? You definitely get less light pollution, pretty much no matter what hosting site you choose, if you're used to imaging anywhere in the Bay Area. Seeing is a little more hit and miss, right? So if your imaging is dependent on really good seeing, just be cautious about your hosting partner, who you choose to host your telescope. The site I chose as an example, the seeing is on average better than in Oakland, but not by much and not all the time. Much of the spring, for example, it gets very windy in northeastern New Mexico, and seeing's not very good. It can often be terrible. So if you need good seeing, that's a maybe, not a definitely. So just keep that, make sure that's something you evaluate if that's important to you. But definitely you'll get a lot more nights. Even than if you had a home observatory, you will still get more nights. You're going to choose a site where the weather is generally more likely to be clear. So you're going to get a lot more data. A couple things that might not occur to you. You also get some improvements in terms of automation. Just as an example, I don't have to worry about whether it might rain tonight and whether I really should uh, pull the cover off my telescope or take it out or anything like that. If the clouds roll in, the observatory just closes. If I capture a bunch of black images because of that, just totally dark, I don't really care. I'll just delete them when I blink them. So I can just set stuff up to run every night, whether it's clear or not. If it gets something, great. If it doesn't, great. It also gets automatic integration with weather station at my hosting partner. So things like I happen to be running a mount with um, a high precision pointing model. So it cares about atmospheric refraction and things like that. So it needs weather data. They're already there, which is great. Um, Definitely less driving, right? I don't need to travel to dark skies as a result of having my telescope permanently under dark skies. But I said less driving, not none. I still like to go out to my scope for routine maintenance. You may choose to, you may not. I still like to. I end up going on site about once a year. And then finally, equipment support, right? If you're someone who you're not really great at the setup part or the troubleshooting hardware part, a lot of the hosting partners can help with that. So that's true whether it's your initial polar alignment. They've done it 100 times, 1,000 times. They're perfectly comfortable taking someone else's telescope and getting it perfectly polar aligned, as an example. Or I don't know, troubleshooting an issue with the camera or the filter wheel or whatever. They can in fact help with that. The level of support varies from partner to partner. So again, that's something you should evaluate when you're looking at partners. Anyway, those are the reasons that one might choose to host their telescope remotely. The next question is, well, how big a difference does it make? Is it worth it? Am I going to see a big change in my images? So there are a lot of ways to get better data out of your telescope. Hosting helps with several of them. Um, the first is obviously you're going to get better signal to noise ratio in each of your sub exposures, right? It's just darker skies than we can get around here, unless you're driving to Pinnacles every night, which seems unlikely. Um, so you'll get better sub signal to noise ratio in each sub, which means even a small stack of subs can produce a really good result. Um, the one that surprised me as being even more important than that, though, at least for me, was just being able to get more time with my subject because the telescope is available every single night, and all I need to do is run a sequence in my image capture software, which is Nina in my case. Uh, it I collect a lot more hours than I used to, and you'll see actual numbers from my own experiences in a little while. Um, and then the last is, yeah, hopefully you're getting, at least on average, better seeing conditions than you do here in the Bay Area. Again, be a little cautious in who you choose as a hosting partner if that part's important. So here, I've got a sample data set for you. This is pretty much worst possible case scenario for imaging. This was at Chabot last Friday, so a few nights ago. The moon was almost full. Chabot, even on a moonless night, is Bortle 8. I only had a 4-inch aperture telescope, and I only got 30 minutes of exposure time with a one-shot color camera. This wasn't my trying to produce a wonderful image. This was actually for outreach. This was for people visiting Chabot Space and Science Center and wanting to see what telescopes do. So this is very satisfying for sharing with the general public because they can see it live. But this is not a very good image of M81 and M82, right? If I were serious about my astrophotography, I would want to be able to do better than that. So what happens if the skies get a little bit better? Uh, this is a couple weeks earlier, same subject as it happens, a little more exposure time, 60 minutes instead of 30, and no moon. And things start to get better. I start to see a little bit of the hydrogen alpha streamers coming out of M82. I can get hints of H2 regions in M81. It gets a little better, but it's still clearly an urban image with a small telescope. Okay, well, what happens if you have a bigger telescope? This is an image I took a couple years ago from my backyard. Similar type of exposure time, at least for the color data. I've got a little H alpha in here as well. But this is a 12-inch aperture telescope. This is the one that I now have hosted at Deep Sky West in New Mexico. Um, things improve with a bit more aperture. You start to see this galaxy peeking out, Holmberg 9. Because I was able to add some H2 data, I get all these hydrogen alpha data. I can see all these star forming regions in M81, and the streamers get to be really obvious. So this is kind of, if I were shooting in my backyard, not going anywhere dark and not putting a lot of time into it, this is kind of what I'd expect. And I'd be pretty happy with this if I were just a weekend shooter from my home. And my backyard is in Oakland with really bad light pollution. So this is Bortle 8, Bortle 9 if the moon is out at all. Um, okay, well, what if I take that same telescope and drive it somewhere darker? So this again is a few years ago. This is one night, and I think I actually ended up with only about 4.5 or 5 hours worth of data on this one. Um, but this is from Lake Berryessa with the same telescope as the last image. And finally, I'm starting to see what I really want in an image of M81 and M82, right? I've got hints of the integrated flux nebula here that Steve talked about a little bit last week. Holmberg 9 is beginning to show a little bit of definition. This isn't bad, but I only got 4.5 hours of data. That's the problem with driving your telescope somewhere dark. You're not going to do it every night or every clear night, right? You're going to do it occasional weekends. So I was super happy with this image, but I still wanted better. So once I moved the telescope to New Mexico, suddenly I could get a lot more data. Instead of 4.5 hours, same subject, 66 hours, same telescope. Um, Similar skies. Deep Sky West in this part of the sky is probably Bortle 3. It's not quite Bortle 2. Other parts of the sky are Bortle 2 from this location. So it's maybe a touch darker than Lake Berryessa was, but not a lot. Similar seeing conditions, but really the difference is I could get 66 hours of data. It took a month and a half, but I could get a lot of data on one subject. And I can't get the combination of dark skies and a lot of data from home. So this is where hosting really helps, right? Is that combination of the dark skies and the data volume together. So I was hoping as a result of the hosting that I'd see pretty substantial differences in my data quality. So versus Taking pictures at home, yeah, I definitely got each sub was distinctly better than at home. So even if I were willing to capture 66 hours worth of data at home, I wasn't going to get the same image quality. In fact, I had struggled to get any of the integrated flux nebula at all from home, even with 30 or 40 hours. I think I never pushed it past that. Um, Compared to driving to a dark site, I can get a lot more integration time than if I'm just driving to a dark site. Plus, I don't get uh, frustrated with the process of getting to dark skies all the time, which is a huge plus. So really the advantage is the combination of the dark skies and the additional time on the target. So I promised earlier in the presentation that I'd give you an idea of how my uh, imaging improved as a result of hosting. And it seemed the best measure of it that I could come up with was just how many hours of data or how many gigabytes of data did I collect from home and occasional driving to dark skies versus hosting. So I looked at my average data volume when I was taking my telescope out into the backyard and using it heavily, right? I like imaging a lot, so I did that a lot. I even had a cover and would leave the telescope out there for several days at a time. And I was producing about 120 gigabytes worth of data per year from my backyard with a full frame camera. As soon as I started hosting, that went from 120 gig of data per year to just under 2 terabytes per year over the last couple years. So the total amount of data that I was collecting went way up, factor of whatever that is, 18-ish, something like that. So I was just producing a lot more data, which let me produce a lot better images. Um, it was interesting. I found I wasn't actually creating more final photographs than I was beforehand. It was still about one picture every 6 weeks. Um, I prefer to take fewer pictures, but um, deeper pictures. Some people prefer to go the other way. It's not a right or a wrong. It's just my style for deep sky imaging. I'd rather have fewer of them, but uh, see how far I can push the equipment. Um, so it was still about the same number of photographs every year, but just a lot more data and a lot better quality data. So what does it cost? Because this is the major barrier for most people. So there are two types of costs. First are the monthly hosting costs. I'll cover that. Um, the costs vary a lot depending on the size of your telescope, primarily is the biggest driver. So depending on how much floor space your telescope is going to need, the hosting partners charge based on that floor space. They different hosting providers do it differently, but it's really all still comes down to square footage. How many telescopes can they cram into an observatory? Because one roll-off roof observatory is going to cost them X number of dollars to run. Is it going to hold 20 telescopes or is it going to hold 200? Um, so they tend to judge it based on how much room your scope will need to not smack into someone else's scope, even if you point the two at the worst possible angle. Um, the other things that drive hosting costs are how much support they offer. There's a pretty wide range from a lot of support, total complete turnkey, where they're going to install it. They're going to build whatever peer adapter you need to attach it to their peer. They're going to polar align it for you. They're going to address any hardware failures. They'll change cables periodically. They'll clean optics for you. They'll do everything. To some of the hosting partners do nothing aside from making sure the internet is up and making sure uh, the observatory itself opens and closes appropriately. Uh, Deep Sky West, where I'm hosting, leans towards that, right? There's very, very little support. For me, that was fine. That's what I wanted. I wanted to take on most of the support myself, but for other people, that might not be a match. So the level of support you want and need will also drive the pricing. One other thing that drives square footage that a lot of people don't think about is do you need a flat panel? Are you going to have a separate luminescent panel that you aim the telescope at to produce flats, or are you going to just point it at the sky? Obviously, you can't put a t-shirt over your telescope because you're not there touching it, etc. So, what are you going to do to ensure you get a nice diffuse, well illuminated field for your flats? If you have a smaller telescope, there are little flip flat type devices that will work as both flats and lens caps, which is really nice. But those tend to max out at a relatively small size, 6 or 8 inches, something in that range. Though there may be some larger. I've never done a lot of research on that. And the flip flat will also increase. It doesn't necessarily save you much in square footage because it sticks out the front of your telescope and makes your telescope bigger, which means, again, you could smack into someone else's telescope if they're not spaced properly. So, yeah, you do. Whoever you talk to will ask you about what are your plans for flats, or they'll just tell you it's sky flats. That's all we tolerate with this size. Um, the quality of the skies also does seem to affect pricing a little bit. The sites that are renowned for having very good seeing and are at altitude tend to be a little pricier than ones that maybe are somewhere really dark, but not up above the water vapor and maybe don't have quite as good seeing. I don't know how much of that is driven by, well, it's just more expensive for them, and how much of that is just, well, that's where the first ones were built, and they still have less competitive pricing. I'm not certain, but the sky quality does seem to matter a bit in driving the pricing. Uh, the country where you choose to host also is an interesting thing to look at and does affect the pricing. Um, you're not limited to the US. A lot of people are now choosing Chile, for example, both to get new subjects that they can aim their telescope at, right? If they feel like they're imaging the same things year over year, suddenly there are a whole new set of objects if you put your telescope in the southern hemisphere. And I've run into several people who also host their telescope in Spain. Um, and I'm sure there are other locations as well, but you're not limited to the US, so check pricing elsewhere also, just in case. Um, as far as the price ranges, it's a pretty wide uh, swath of pricing there, right? So if you want to host a sea star, for example, there's one site in particular that has a special price just for sea stars. It's $100 a month. Um, if you are looking at a 70 or 90 or maybe 100 millimeter refractor, it's more like 200 a month, depending on the size of the mount, size of the pier, etc. And if you have a relatively large scope, mine's a 12-inch, for example, and it's about 800 a month. Um, so it's a pretty wide range. So think carefully about what size telescope you actually want to host and what you can afford. Also keep in mind that some sites require you to purchase insurance for your telescope. It's not pricey, but you definitely don't want to be surprised by it. So, what are the things you run into aside from just the monthly hosting cost? What other? Oh, sorry, forgot I have a picture here just to show the telescope density that Starfront in particular is using. This is one of their small peer. This is the $200 a month type hosting, right? So these are relatively small telescopes, not their smallest size, but bigger than the sea stars and more than like a Red Cat 51. Um, so it's pretty dense, right? That's a lot of telescopes crammed into one roll-off roof there. You'll see an image. Well, I'll show it early. I'll jump to it. As opposed to this is an observatory that's catering to 17, 14, 17, 20, and I think there's even a 24-inch telescope in here. The density is a lot lower. This would be more like 1,200 a month, rather than the 200 a month that you see in this type of more densely packed site. So the other thing that's nice to see here is it's clearly they have enough customers to where they're getting some expertise, right? That's a lot of telescopes that are getting hosted, and this is just at Starfront, and I don't think this is even quite an up-to-date picture for them. They've got quite a few roll-off roofs now, and they're pretty sizable. So this is in Texas. This is not at high altitude, but they're probably, but it's very dark. I think it's Portal 2, might even be Portal 1, and the seeing's pretty good. Um, and they're attracting a lot of customers because their pricing is super aggressive, and they do in fact know what they're doing. So they'd be a good choice. All right. So what are other costs that you might run into that you weren't perhaps expecting or hadn't budgeted for? Um, so some sites will charge for the initial setup, or instead they might require a year-long or a 6-month contract, one of the two. So I haven't seen anyone who does both, but most of them will either charge for setup or they'll have a minimum duration of how long you're going to leave your telescope there. One other possible unexpected cost is you need a telescope that you actually can reliably operate remotely. And that means it's got to have an autofocuser and it's got to have a mount that can not get lost, right? Because you don't have an easy way to reset it to some point that you know is close to home. So you have to have a mount that can home or is really consistent in terms of never getting lost. Because if it ever gets lost, you're in trouble and you're going to need support. Some of them actually will just flat out turn you away if you don't have a homing mount. So that's something to be aware of. There is some additional hardware that you will likely need to purchase. You need to be able to power cycle things. That means an IP switch, right? So that over the internet you can turn your computer on and off, your focuser on it, or depending on how your focuser is connected, your USB hub on and off, your telescope itself on and off. All of those things you need to be able to power cycle. So you'll need a power switch of some sort. Uh, a nice one starts at around $250, and you want a fairly nice one because it's going to be exposed to the elements, at least in terms of temperature extremes. So budget for something around $250. Uh, some people choose to use an uninterruptible power supply as well, so that if there's a power outage of some sort, you can shut down uh, more cleanly than if suddenly everything just turns off. Um, I use one. I think that's turned out to be a waste of money. I wouldn't know if there was a power outage in the middle of an imaging run. It's not like I'm going to wake up in the middle of the night and notice it. So, okay, I have 15 minutes. I could shut down my telescope, but I'm not going to know to do that. Where this might help is if the hosting partner doesn't have clean power, right? If they tend to get power spikes or something like that, if they really just don't have clean, consistent power, it can protect your equipment. And also it'll protect against really short outages that might be caused by thunderstorms or whatever. Um, I would just talk to the hosting partner and find out whether that's recommended or not. In my case, I think I use one, but I think it turned out to be a waste of money. Um, Also, if you are running an ASI Air or equivalent right now, I don't think there's a way to use the ASI Air remotely. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I would expect to have to switch to a mini PC of some sort. I don't think you can run an ASI Air from over remote desktop, but if someone knows how to do it, I don't think the hosting partner would object to it. They might, depends on the hosting partner. But I would plan on something running Nina or Voyager or something like that. So a mini PC installed at your telescope. Other charges, I know some hosting partners actually charge for the peer adapter. I haven't run into anyone who charged for the peer itself, but they sometimes charge for a peer adapter if you need a specialized adapter to attach your particular mount to the pier. Um, and lots of the hosting partners require you to use particular software for your remote desktop just to make their support a little easier and to make sure their network isn't put at risk. So you may be pushed into a particular remote desktop software. Um, I don't think that's a huge deal. The particular site I chose, the software was free. You don't need the professional version or anything, so this shouldn't be a cost, or if it is, it'll be a small one, but it's something to be aware of. This is one I hadn't expected, and probably should have. Whoops. The additional storage for backup. Suddenly eating 2 terabytes of data per year instead of, a tenth of a terabyte. I had to buy more hard drives. I actually ended up getting a storage area network or network attached storage system at home. Um, I probably didn't need to go that far, but um, do plan on the higher data volume in terms of your data storage. And then the last is usually there's some maintenance covered, but basic may be very basic. So you may be looking at, one-time hourly costs effectively for things like cleaning your optics, troubleshooting hardware issues, etc. So check with when you're shopping around, just check and see what they do charge for and what they don't charge for. The rates are
Hey,
usually
Jared, can I ask
reasonable.
a
Yeah,
question?
please.
Uh, um, by the way, I never asked you at the beginning, but are you okay with taking questions during?
Absolutely. I'm sorry. I should have said that. Yeah, interrupt all you want.
All right. So you said something that made me think, w would these people insist on like Windows computers or would Linux, other kinds of computers be okay?
It's not something I've asked. I'd be surprised if they cared.
Okay.
The only thing I've seen them care about is they do care about often how you're communicating with your telescope. So that remote desktop software in particular,
Right, but
they
since you
they usually
said
care about.
remote desktop software, that
It
implied,
could be to a Linux box. I don't think they're going to care about that.
okay,
As long as their remote desktop software has a Linux version so that the computer you have at your telescope can use it, um, I would expect you would be fine.
gotcha.
Cool. Um, so that's all I've run into I've been hosting now for 2.5 years, something like that. Those are the only costs I've run into. I've never needed more than the basic support, but then I also like traveling out to my telescope once a year, so I take care of the periodic stuff on my own. Uh, yeah, so for me, it was really the power switch, the UPS, and then just the monthly hosting. So I didn't have any surprises in terms of costs.
Obviously, you had to buy a whole new telescope setup.
Well, no, I can't. Well, I already had two, so and I'll
Well,
cover
right,
that a little later.
right.
Why would you want to do this if you only have one telescope? My guess is for most people, the answer to that is going to be no, but we'll cover that in a little while. All right. So how do you choose a hosting partner? What are the things you need to shop for? These are the things I think you need to pay attention to. So the first one is a lot of them are at or near capacity, or were the last time I checked, which was maybe 9 months ago for a friend of mine. So check and see if they even have room or whether it's a wait list. Um, Next would be think about how much support you're actually going to need. And even things like, is it 24/7 or not? The hosting partner I chose, it was supposed to be 24/7. There was someone who lived on site. That person has left the company, so now they only have someone on site once to twice a week. Be cautious about that. That may not be enough, right? I would get pretty frustrated if my telescope broke and just needed a power reset or something, or my IP switch didn't reset and I had to wait 3 days for someone to do a power cycle. So at least find out what level of support there is and make sure it's sufficient for what you want to do. Um, I'd also look at whether you're allowed on site or not. I want to be on site. I want to do that routine maintenance. I want to go out. In fact, next later this month for my telescope. The mount needs re-greasing, and I need some new firmware in a filter wheel and fun things like that. And I want to do that myself. I like it. It's fun. I want to clean the optics myself. I like it. For me, that's fun. Uh, some of them, like Starfront, the inexpensive one that I showed a picture of earlier, they don't allow you on site because the telescopes are so tightly packed, it's hard to walk around, and they don't want anyone accidentally damaging someone else's equipment. So I'd ask that: are you allowed on site? Um, how are you going to get your telescope there? Is it something you're going to drive? Is it something you're going to ship? Are you okay with shipping your telescope? Um, I was fine with shipping I would be fine with driving my telescope to New Mexico, but I'm not so certain about do I want to ship it to Chile. That scares me a little bit, right? Even though I'd love to have southern skies. So give that some thought, not just how will you use it, but how will you actually get the equipment there. I definitely ask about what infrastructure they have. Things like it can be really useful to have a video camera that's pointing at your telescope, just so you can figure out, I told it to shut down, is it pointed the right way, right? Or it was supposed to shut down at the end of the night. Is it in its home position? I'd love to check the next morning. The software says it is. I like being able to see it, and make sure that it really is there. Is their internet backbone enough to support the data volumes that you're going to be dealing with? They all should be, but it's worth asking. Do they have backup generators on site? So things like that. I'd ask a little about their infrastructure. Um, I would want to pick a hosting provider that caters to the size telescope that I'm dealing with. Things like these larger plane wave mounts, for example, that you see here, the giant one-armed fork mounts. They're really finicky. They're great once they get going, but they're really finicky. I don't think I'd want to send that to someone who hadn't already done half a dozen of those. Even if I was willing to do it myself, they can take a couple weeks to really get going well. I would want some help with that. So I wouldn't want a hosting partner that didn't have experience with them. They're finicky about vibrations nearby. Does the generator cause any vibrations when it runs its test run, and is it set up for daytime, not nighttime? Little things like that. Um, I'd want to know that they're comfortable with my size telescope, that it's not their first try at that size. So I think that history matters a bit. Um, Rodents. This came up in a little bit in our discussion before we kicked off the meeting. I've had two wires eaten through in the 2.5 years that my telescope was there. Both times it happened to be a dew heater, luckily, which I didn't care about. I've never actually had to turn on the dew heater for my site, which is great. But yeah, are they doing a decent job of keeping rodents out? Have they had a problem? These are things that it's worth asking about. And then the big one is weather, right? So what is their weather really like? Most of us would know to ask about, well, what's your typical seeing? Um, you may not, if you're putting a Red Cat 51 out there, you probably don't care too much what the seeing is. But if you're going to put a 17-inch plane wave on site, you care a lot about the seeing. So I'd want to know about the seeing conditions. Wind, the one that surprised me for my hosting partner is I lose 2 out of 3 nights during the spring to wind. The observatory literally won't open if the wind speed is above 15 knots, and my telescope doesn't perform well if it's above 6. So it's above 6 2 out of 3 nights. Even the nights that it's open, I'll often capture, 8, 10 hours of data and have to throw out 6 of them due to wind. So that's definitely something to ask about. Uh, this is one that's interesting that doesn't come up very often, and most people wouldn't think to ask it. Not just how many clear nights do they have per year, but do they tend to run in streaks, right? The site I chose, I can have 6, 8, 10 nights in a row that are really bad. Whereas if you choose a site like uh, what are they called? Sierra Remote. No, they rarely have more than 2 or 3 in a row. The two sites have about the same number of total clear nights, but I'm a lot more likely to lose an object because I had a lot of nights in a row and lose my opportunity for the year on a particular object than if I were at Sierra Remote, as an example. And then finally, it's just light pollution. How dark is it? Are there variations? Is there a light dome from a city in one direction? Is that a direction you care about, et cetera? And then finally is, the obvious one is just, all right, what are they charging? Is that good value for me compared to the other sites? So those are the things that I would evaluate in choosing a partner. Then this one I've already shown. This is not the dome I'm in. This is the neighboring dome at Deep Sky West. I'm in the one off to the left that you can see just the roof from. That's where the little telescopes are. At 12 inches, mine counts as a little telescope. This one, despite having looks like a TAC 130 in the back there, is where most of the bigger telescopes are. Again, I think this 14-inch Celestron is the smallest one that's in here, aside from the refractors in the back there. So most of the others are larger in this particular location. And then there are more behind me as well. I think this one holds about 15 or so telescopes. So, all right, let's assume you've evaluated your hosting partner, you've chosen one, you think you want to do it. Are you going to be successful at it? What are the things you need to do to get ready for hosting your telescope? By far the most important, the one I would tell you you're crazy if you don't do this. And I have been trying to support someone for the past year who didn't do this, and it has cost him about a year and a half of observing time so far, and his telescope still isn't running. Um, Run it at home first. And I don't mean for a night to make sure it's working, or I've taken it out on weekends and it was working great. I mean, put it in your backyard, get a cover for it, and leave it set up for a month and try to run it without touching it, aside from taking the cover off. If you can get through a month of running your telescope at home, you're probably ready, right? It'll probably work at your hosting partner just about as well as it does at home. If you find, oh no, I've got to come out to reboot it, or oh no, I needed to do these things, the Windows patches, I don't know how to handle without going out to the computer or something like that. Or gee, what happens if I power cycle it when it's pointed, off to the eastern sky somewhere? Um, Try all that stuff out. You should be able to recover from every failure you can invent uh, from inside your living room, den, wherever you want to run your telescope. So try pretending that it's a remote telescope, even though it's only in your backyard, and see if you can keep it going. Even things like take the camera off, put it back on. Is tilt still fine, right? Have I sorted stuff out enough to where it's repeatable so that when it gets assembled on site, it's going to just work? Um, One that I struggled with for a little while was, what do you do if I installed new firmware on my focuser and it reset the focusing position? And I didn't realize it also moved the focuser in the process. It moved it all the way in. How do you find focus when you're completely out of focus? You can't see even a blur that would represent a star, and you don't know whether to go in or out to refine focus. It's little things like that. See if you can sort out running the telescope for an entire month at home before you think about sending it to your hosting partner. If you can, you're probably good. If you can't, you got a little more work to do. One other thing you need to do to get ready is sort out how you're going to handle maintenance items. So things like, are you going to capture darks? You can't put the lens cap on the telescope. So what are you going to do? You may not need darks every night. You might only need them every 6 months, but you're going to need them occasionally. What do you do? In my case, I have taken one of the slots in my filter wheel and I had a black blanking panel manufactured. Somebody 3D printed it for me, and I stuck it in there, and that's my lens cap. So it's really just a camera cap instead of a lens cap. Works great. You need to plan that sort of thing out. What are you going to do for new flats? Are you going to do sky flats? Have you tried them without t-shirts? Do you know where to point the telescope, what part of the sky is likely to be evenly illuminated, when to do it, and so that you don't get stars, etc. Um, Work out how you're going to do flats if you don't have a flat panel. Uh, and then just think about, you don't need to solve the problems, but think about what are you going to do for periodic maintenance? How are the optics going to get cleaned? Mine don't get cleaned frequently. It's basically once a year. And you'd be amazed, even living outdoors, I can't tell a difference in performance after a year. I go look at the telescope and I can't believe it sees anything, right? It's covered in red dust from New Mexico, optics included. But it still does great. I don't notice a difference in performance, but I don't think I'd want to go 2 or 3 years. Um, so how are you going to manage that? My mount needs re-greasing. How am I going to manage that? Camera desiccant needs to be recharged periodically. How am I going to manage that? Filters filters, what if I buy a new filter? How's it going to get it installed? How am I going to get it installed? Worth talking to your hosting provider to find out whether they do that sort of thing for you. Cables, USB cables, especially if you're running USB 3, how long are they good when they're exposed to temperature extremes? I'd want to replace them every year, maybe every two. I wouldn't want to go longer than that. Um, Keep in mind some firmware updates require physical presence. I mentioned I've got to do a firmware update on my filter wheel. That requires unplugging it, putting in a USB cable, putting it into a new mode, and then I can download firmware to it, and then putting it all back. So that one requires someone to actually be there. Um, So just think that through a little bit, talk with your hosting provider about it, just know what you're getting into. Um, and then finally is given the fluctuations in tariffs, is there anything I should have as a spare? Um, that's something I would care about. I was giving serious thought to buying a spare camera even just to have it because I'm worried that they're either going to be hard to get or uh, ridiculously expensive. I don't know the answer to that, but I'd give it a little thought. That's really it for getting ready. If you can run your telescope in the backyard for a month, you can probably run it remotely for a year. There isn't a lot of difference. All right, so what do you lose if you decide to host your telescope? It's not trivial. Um, you don't get to play with your equipment anymore, or at least not frequently. You don't get to hang out with other astrophotographers at your dark sky, the Club Dark Sky site, chatting about whatever you've been doing. Um, you don't have a telescope for star parties. You don't get that time under the dark skies and, out in nature, etc. Um, I like doing outreach a lot. I can't do that if my only telescope is in New Mexico. Um, so for me, the answer was I don't have just one telescope. Probably a lot of us don't have just one telescope. Maybe everyone on this call doesn't have just one. Um, so um, I don't see my hosted telescope as my one imaging scope. It's the one that's hosted, it's the one under dark skies, but it's not my only imaging scope. I've also got a 4-inch refractor with a nice camera that's a lot of fun that I can carry in one trip. I can load into the car in one trip. It doesn't require back and forth. It doesn't require a hand cart. It's easy for outreach. So I get to keep all this interaction. I get to keep all this time under dark skies. I get to still go to star parties if I want to, but it's only because I have a second telescope because that primary telescope is no longer useful for those types of activities. So I try to think of the remote scope as a specialized instrument. It's my large deep sky imaging telescope, not just my only telescope. So I would definitely recommend if you like more than just image processing, if you like tweaking the equipment, if you like trying to figure out how to make those little improvements in guiding, how to get better polar alignment, uh, all that sort of stuff, keep a second scope. It doesn't need to be a big one. It doesn't need to be an expensive one. Heck, maybe you want to send the small telescope off to the hosting site and keep the bigger one at home. It doesn't matter. You've got to figure that out for yourself, what will work for you and your observing. But definitely something other than just the hosted telescope, or you will lose all the fun side of the equipment. Basically, the computer screen just isn't a substitute for being out under the stars. So don't try to make it a substitute. So that's really all I found that I gave up. And again, with the second smaller scope, I didn't feel it at all. You might be different, but for me, the second smaller scope was just fine for keeping all of that interaction and outreach and so on. All right. So who is hosting for? Where is it a good match? Where is it a poor match? So if you find you have to drive to dark skies a lot and it's not fun for you, right? Like, I mean, if you're going to Pinnacles and you love it and you're fine with the number of images you produce per year, stick with Pinnacles. Pinnacles is great. It's lovely skies. It's dark. It gets you the time under the night skies. That's wonderful. But if you want to be imaging all the time or collecting data all the time, not just those occasional nights that you can get out, then hosting your telescope might be a good match. Uh, if you, in order to try and get all the imaging time you want, you're um, imaging every night at home, but you have lousy skies, again, hosting might be a really good match. So if you're trying to get both good quality data and the higher volume, hosting is likely a good match. Um, you do have to have a reasonable budget. I mean, a reasonably big budget, right? Even $200 a month isn't trivial. So be prepared for that. But 200,000 a month if you're in reasonably good financial position and this part of the hobby is important to you, that's not a crazy amount to spend, right? Many of us spend that much on average on hardware upgrades. So you might be better served instead of your next couple hardware upgrades to try hosting instead. Um, Mostly, I think the biggest thing is if what you love in imaging is getting out there with the equipment and capturing the data and you hate the computer side of it, don't bother with this, right? The computer side, the processing, the playing with the software, etc., that has to be a joy for you as well, because that's what you're going to spend most of your time doing with a hosted telescope. So if that's joyful to you, great. If it's not, if that's just a chore and it's only to get to the photograph, stick with doing it from home. Um, and then the last one is if you feel like I've done everything I want to in the Northern Hemisphere and you want a whole new set of targets, think about Chile. They are similarly priced. It'll take more to ship your telescope down there, obviously, but the cost to run it is even for some very high-end sites is no higher than in the US. So that might actually be worth a thought. And then finally, I was going to close with just some images I've taken over the past couple years, all with the remote telescope, giving you an idea of what I've been able to do with mine. None of these, I think, are images I could have produced from home because they required a combination of both dark skies and a fair amount of integration time. I think the shortest one I'm going to show was something like 18 hours of integration time. And that's just a struggle for me at home, getting that combination. So I'll just walk through a few of them here. First one is Blue Horsehead. That was an 8-panel mosaic. Um, Mosaics, by the way, are a pain in the neck, but dark skies help a lot with mosaics because it dramatically reduces the gradients. And the light pollution gradients are the hardest part of mosaics, dealing with them. So this was the Blue Horsehead, which was something I'd never been able to capture with reasonable quality from the Bay Area, and it was relatively easy from New Mexico.
Hey, Jerry,
Uh,
is that 18
yeah,
hours per panel?
no, that's total. This one is total. All of the times I report in here are total integration. So this is a little under two or a little over 2 hours per panel, and this is with a monochrome camera, so and straight RGB, no luminance in this one. Um, Cygnus loop, this one was a pain. It was a 12 panel mosaic. Even under dark skies, that many panels is a pain in the neck. Um, and it was 60 hours total for hydrogen alpha and O3, and then a little extra time for RGB stars. Um, and the driver for this was just I'd never been able to do a decent image of the entire Cygnus loop, right? It's just getting 60 hours of integration time from Oakland, even though Oakland does reasonably well in terms of it works okay with narrowband. The light pollution gradients are just a disaster. So I had never had luck at home, even on narrowband subjects for a large mosaic like this. Um, Flying bat and squid. I had tried this a couple times from home with um, with narrowband filters, 3 nanometer narrowband filters, but the squid is actually really faint, and even with a 3 nanometer O3 filter, it just wasn't dark enough for me to get a decent result in Oakland. So again, this only needed 18 hours. This was a single panel, so it's a much smaller area. But this was, not a great result, but a pretty good one, and definitely one I couldn't have gotten from here. This one's one of my more recent images. Is it an 8 or is this a 12? No, this is an 8 panel mosaic, Spaghetti Nebula. So another really big supernova remnant. Um, 68 hours just in hydrogen alpha. So this is over 100 hours total on this one, 120-ish. Um, and the O3 is super faint in this. And I've got one thing that's kind of cool in this. You can barely see it. It's right where my mouse pointer is. I don't even know if it'll show on your screens because Zoom downsamples things so much. But there's a little teeny tiny planetary nebula right here. And I've got that listed as my first pending astronomical discovery right now. So it hasn't been confirmed yet, but nobody else has owned up to it. So that might be cool. Um, Triangulum Galaxy. This was again a single panel, a bunch of integration time, and this is the first galaxy where I tried adding O3 into my data set, and it came out really nice. I thought that I don't see it. Where is it? Oh, right here. I thought this was actually my first discovery. There's a little planetary nebula where my mouse pointer is here. But it turns out I was 18 months too late on that one. It had already been found. So, but cool that, from the remote hosting site, I'm on the edge of actually seeing things nobody's seen before, which is really a lot of fun. Deerlich Group and Stefan's Quintet. Goal on this one was I wanted to get some of the dust that you see down here at the bottom, and I wanted to see the foreground hydrogen alpha here. That's in the Milky Way, not in the space between the galaxies. Um, just to get that sense of depth out of the image. And again, that would have been really hard to do here in Oakland. So 52 hours total of integration time. And the last one I'm going to show is field of view on the horsehead that isn't seen very often. Most people just focus on the horsehead itself or horsehead and flame together. This was an 8 panel mosaic, 110 hours total of integration time. And what I really wanted in this one was to be able to show the uh, H alpha and the reflection nebula together in the top left corner up here. That was uh, that was the goal for this. So to get reasonable resolution on the horsehead and flame, but also show this nebulosity up here, just because I thought it made really nice framing from an artistic perspective. So all of these images, I'm confident I at least couldn't have done uh, from home under urban skies, or they would have taken me multiple years rather than a single year. Um, So that's really what I wanted to get out of the hosting, and for me, it's been successful. So that's it. That's everything I wanted to cover. Any questions?
Well, thank you very much, Jared. Yeah, so please, questions for Jared. I know, Ian, you put some things in the comments, but anyway.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't read the comments as we went along, but
Oh, it was just some comments about the the type of computer you can use for Starfront. They don't care whether you have a ASI Air, but they do suggest a B link or something like that, and which I assume means you also have to install something on it to
Yeah.
run whatever application.
Yep.
So
Yeah, if it's perfectly possible that people have found a way. I mean, if you need a B-Link, then you have a PC there. Maybe the PC is what's running the ASI Air software. I don't know. I haven't run an ASI Air, so I'm not trying to provide recommendations there. I'm sure you could talk to Starfront and find out what
no, I
people
already
have done.
yeah,
So if you put it in there, great.
Starfront will basically give you you'll basically plug the ASI Air into the Ethernet proper and just use it. They'll send you a VPN configuration and you just VPN into it.
Cool.
So yeah, so from that perspective, and then the other comment was if you're operating in a warm climate like New Mexico can be in the summertime or Texas, then you definitely want a cooled camera. And so that's a thought too.
Yeah, if you don't have a cooled camera at the moment, you would definitely want one. Most modern CMOS cameras do great up to maybe, I don't know, maybe 15 Celsius, 20 Celsius tops. I wouldn't want to be running any higher than that. The images are just going to be a lot noisier than you probably want. So I agree with you. I would definitely want a cooled camera.
Yeah. And then the only other thing is remote desktop. Um, I in the area that I work or have worked, we use a combination of software tools that only run in Windows, and we are not a Windows shop. So we have plenty of ways to get around that problem. And so finding a remote desktop tool that talks to Windows, there's a ton, VNC, RDC, you name it.
Yep.
But otherwise, I think it's a pretty doable thing now compared to say even 5 years ago, when it was considerably more expensive.
Yeah, I mean, it's not quite mainstream yet, but it's a lot more viable than it was, definitely. I agree with you
Yeah.
on that.
Something else to consider too is if you're going to ship your equipment to a foreign country, you might want to check on the tax liability or requirement, because sometimes there are requirements that you pay VAT or something like that when you ship it in. Spain might be one, and I think Chile is another.
See, they definitely charge us import duties, and unfortunately, they even charge them on a telescope being returned after repair, I have found, for Chile, which is a pain in the neck. That was very hard for my friend to work around. He did manage to work around it. They're not supposed to charge for that, but it took rather a lot of effort. So yeah, I don't mean to trivialize the effort required in dealing with international customs and taxation if you choose an overseas site. It's it's doable, but it's some work.
Yeah, we had, I can't remember now if it was Brian Valente who spoke one month a year or two ago or John Hayes, but one of them spoke extensively on how they shipped their telescope to Chile and all the taxes they paid, which was probably, equivalent to their equipment cost. Like basically, I think a lot of people who do that wind up buying the telescope of the person whose spot they're taking. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, the person who I've been helping with some troubleshooting they ended up needing to buy the telescope. They bought it in Hong Kong and had it shipped from there and ended up with much lower import duties than if it had gone through the US.
Yeah, but then you lose
So
what you just said earlier, which is the ability to test it at
yep,
home for a
and
month.
that has cost them badly. The
Right.
telescope is still not working a year and a half after installation. So yeah,
I was going to ask, do you have issues with data transfer, or is that
none,
none?
none. It's been reliable. fast enough to not bother me. If I'm downloading, a night's sessions, my network will be busy for maybe 10, 15 minutes. Um, it's it's not a problem. I mean, it's not 30 seconds, but it's minutes, not hours, to get a night's worth of data.
All right, cool.
You mentioned that you bought a storage area network device,
Yeah.
and one of the things that you could do is set that up in a backup mode to back up your remote data, and then just don't worry about it because it
Yep.
uses a dribble protocol like FTP or something. So if it fails somewhere along the line, it'll just restart by itself.
Yep.
Huge advantage of a SAN like
Yeah, I did actually run it that way for a short while, and I found the computer I have on site is so underpowered. I mean, it barely can run Nina, that I didn't want to run the VPN software in the background that would get me to the NAS. And so I ended up turning that off, because I was ending up with not very good guiding as a result, when
oh
it was
no,
running in the
just
background.
just set it to pull the data from during the
Oh, I
day
could have
when
had to
you're
do
not
it.
around.
Yeah, I could have had to do it in the morning. I didn't do that. I just do it manually.
So instead of can you do things like tail scale or whatever, those kind of things? Do you know what that is?
I don't know Tailscale.
It's an interesting product. It's free for people, to use on their own, where you basically remote devices can appear to be on your home network.
I haven't tried it.
Yeah, check it out. It's interesting. So, I mean, so for instance, I do it in reverse of what you do, but like if I'm traveling, I can still control my home telescope
Yep.
uh, by,
I can run mine. I mean, I've got AnyDesk set up for the remote desktop software. I can run that on my phone, so I can kick off my telescope if I want to, or check on it on my phone from anywhere or from my iPad.
right.
I'll
Okay.
frequently show it running when I'm doing the EAA outreach events at Chabot. I'll show, and here's the
But
telescope running into Mexico. You can see how,
yeah, but I'm
other
just saying,
astronomers do
so
things.
not just remote desktop. I mean, basically, the device looks like to the various devices you connect up, it looks like they're on the same network.
Hmm.
So you can do
I
other
haven't
things.
tried that.
Anyway, it's a thing. All right. Any more questions or comments for Jared?
I'd say it's a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. I was happy to be invited.
All right. Well, we'll come watch the next one. You're always welcome.
Excellent.
Um, well, I'll give it another couple seconds and then we'll call it a night. All right. I guess nobody's piping up, so yell if you have second thoughts. But otherwise, please everybody unmute and give Jared a hand for a wonderful presentation. Yay!
Thanks for coming.
Thanks, everyone. And my email's here. Do reach out to me. My phone, for that matter, as well. Do reach out if you have any follow-up questions or anything, or want to ask specifics about the particular hosting sites that I've compared.
All right, will do. All right, thank you very much, and see
Thank you.
everybody next month. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.